Welcome back to Budget Mechanic. Today I want to talk about a controversial subject in car maintenance, transmission flushes. Some people say you gotta do them, others say it's gonna destroy your transmission. Make sure you stick around to the end because I'm gonna put this whole controversy to rest once and for all. A lot of people think their transmissions are scary and complicated and they don't want to touch them. So we've made a few videos that show how easy working on your own transmission can be. So we've got one on how you can find out when you should change the fluid in your transmission and also some money saving tips, and we'll put the link to that above. We've also made a video on the practicals of how to change your transmission fluid and filter all by yourself, and we'll put a link to that above as well. We've got lots of great content planned for you in the future, so make sure you subscribe to Budget Mechanic and hit that alert bell so you don't miss out on any of it. So jumping right into the discussion, on one hand we have a transmission flush, which is what your manual tells you to do at a certain mileage, and it requires a machine and a technician, removes all of the fluid in your transmission, puts brand new fluid in. On the other side we have the fluid change, which is just draining out the transmission fluid that you can get out of your transmission pan and replacing that fluid, and doesn't require any technician or machine. You can do it yourself. Now a lot of people will say never get your transmission flush, it's going to wreck your transmission. And the reason they're saying that is because there's a few things that can happen when you get a transmission flushed, because they use a machine that uses a lot of pressure and strong detergents to clean everything out. And when you do that and you have an older transmission that has deposits built up in them, it can strip everything loose all at once and you get chunks floating around in there that can actually cause more problems than good. Another thing that can happen, for example, if a transmission is getting old and starting to slip, the actual dirty particles in the fluid will help the plates stick a little bit better, and if you totally flush them with new fluid, now the transmission may start slipping. I'm sure we've all heard of stories of people taking their cars to get their transmission serviced or flushed, and when they get back, the transmission starts acting worse than it ever has. Now these things are true, and they do happen, but often it's because the transmission wasn't maintained properly or often enough. What can happen is due to manufacturers pushing their service intervals out farther and farther on their lifetime transmissions, and people just not servicing their transmissions because they don't think about it as much as they do, say, oil changes. You get 80,000 miles go by before anything is done to a transmission. You get a lot of dirt and particles in that fluid that builds up in different places, and flushing that transmission isn't necessarily going to fix those problems. In fact, it could exacerbate them and make them worse. If your transmission is slamming into gear, it's slipping, you're having all this trouble with it, and you think, I'm gonna go get it flushed and that's gonna fix the problem, chances are it's gonna be worse afterwards. So the other downside to a flush is you have to take it into a technician with specialized equipment, and that can get very expensive. Here in Hawaii, flushes run around $400 to $600 at a mechanic, and maybe even more at a dealership. Now on the other side of the argument, people say, just change the fluid in your transmission. So pull that plug, drain out as much transmission fluid as you can, and replace what you take out. Problem with that is, draining your fluid only gets about 30 to 50% of your old fluid out. So that leaves the rest still in the transmission, still dirty, right? On the plus side, you're doing so without introducing a lot of pressure or detergents that are gonna get in there and break up old deposits that could potentially cause problems. Also, changing the transmission fluid yourself means it's way cheaper. You can get all the transmission fluid you need for a normal car or van for around $40 to $50 online. And if you're doing the filter as well, that's another 20 bucks. Interestingly, a lot of transmission shops now aren't even offering transmission flushes, but instead a transmission service, which is just a glorified fluid change where they change the fluid a couple times in the filter and charge you the same amount as a flush did. Okay, we've considered all the arguments. Here's what I think. Transmission flushes get a bad rap because people wait way too long to get them done, and they treat them as a fix for their transmission problems rather than maintenance. But if you're right on top of it and you're religiously getting that flush done at the right interval from the beginning of the car's life, I think it'll work great for your transmission. That said, I think transmission flushes are the most expensive way to go about maintaining your transmission. I think there's a better way. Generally, a car manufacturer is going to say to get a transmission flush every 50 to 100,000 miles, maybe even longer if you've got like a non-serviceable lifetime transmission. But I recommend you do a transmission fluid change every 30,000. Now, changing your own transmission fluid doesn't get all of the transmission fluid out, as we said, but because you're doing it more often, it's gonna run a cleaner baseline of fluid in your transmission over time, rather than waiting 50, 70, 100,000 miles for the fluid to keep getting dirtier and then changed in a flush. So every 30,000 miles, that's like doing a transmission flush every 5 or 6 oil changes. So on your 6th oil change, just tack on a transmission fluid change. It's about the same amount of work as an oil change anyway. Well, that about wraps it up. Let us know what you think in the comments, whether you're a flusher or a changeling, and we'll see you on the next one.